Welcome to a special edition of the Park Adventurers Club. I'm your host, Rob Whiteside. Thank you guys so much for being with us. We appreciate it. Last week, Disney announced their Q3 earnings, and while I'm the guy that talks about churros and popcorn buckets, and I do have somewhat of a vested interest in the money side of things, I thought it would be nice if we brought on somebody who actually knew a little bit about the money side of things, and here is our special guest, Alex. He's a financial analyst. Alex, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of those churros and popcorn as well, so I can comment on those things a little bit. But yeah, I'll try to be helpful on the financial side more so.
The way this came about is a mutual friend of ours said, "Hey, if you ever talking about money, you got to talk to my buddy Alex. He knows a lot about this kind of stuff, and he has." You're a Disney fan, I take it, right?
Well, I've been a shareholder for a while now, so I guess I'm also a fan. I'm just getting into the phase of my life where I have a young son who's not even 2 years old yet, so we haven't made the trip with him there quite yet, but I'm sure we will soon, and I will become a bigger fan, at least in terms of my spending.
Well, I mean, you know what? If you do not take your kid to Disney, we'll call the Child Protective Services on you. But honestly, you know what? The money side of this, I think that we as Disney fans are emotionally invested in Disney at all times. We have an opinion when they change an attraction or they take something off at Disney Plus. We have a very big opinion. You usually see it spread all across social media. And so when something like this Q3 earnings call comes out, I think everybody sort of stops and wants to know a little bit more. And some big announcements came out of this Q3 earnings call right around the same day, if not this day. They talked about the NFL deal that they just made, the WWE deal that they just made. They're talking more about mergers with Disney Plus and Hulu Plus. And then, of course, they talked a little bit about the stuff that we usually talk about, which are the Disney parks and experiences. So I want to kind of take these one by one with you. Let's start right at this top with the streaming shakeup, I'm calling it. Disney Plus, when it first came out, was separate from Hulu, and then of course they made all the deals with NBC to kind of buy them out of Hulu, and then they had this second property, and they blend them a lot. Personally, just as a user of Disney Plus, I'd prefer that they stay separate because like they're not quite integrated, but it seems like that's their long-term goal is to integrate these. Tell me why this would benefit the company to have one product instead of two.
Sure. And this gets to a fundamental issue that Disney has been dealing with for at least a decade at this point, which is they've been trying to figure out how to transition their video businesses from the linear world. Let's talk about the U.S. because it makes the conversation a lot easier. The U.S. paid TV business to the Netflix video on demand VOD, and then usually subscription
DTC.
video on demand SVOD or D2C. Yes, correct. And they've been trying to make this transition now for obviously Disney Plus launched in was it late 19, and actually ESPN Plus launched in I believe it was early April of 2018. um, they're kind of two parallel paths that are happening here with the entertainment programming assets. Think of traditional, Disney IP, Pixar, Star Wars, Marvel, etc. There's that piece that's moving, but then also there's the sports rights that are moving. And the transitions have been happening at different timelines, basically, which has made this all very messy. You also have the Hulu ownership issues, which took far too long to get resolved, which has also made this messy. So long story short, in a perfect world, they would have came to market from day one with a single offering because the idea is if it's going to be more of a general entertainment programming service in supplementing, the Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, et cetera, the really high quality marquee IP, if you're going to supplement that with general entertainment programming and also sports rights on there, you'd much prefer to have a single service for the sake of having a sufficient number of eyeballs going there every night, ideally, right? Or at least with a high degree of frequency, as opposed to someone popping in once every week or once every couple weeks to see what's new on there. So this is kind of they've kind of been navigating this challenge for many years now. One, what business are we even in? Are we in the Disney Plus business where it's really just a much slimmer content profile, but it's all really high quality and built around our core brands? Or are we something that looks more like Netflix, where there's a wide breadth of content, some of which is for kids, some of which is for Star Wars fans, some of which is for people who are nowhere near either of those two buckets. Um, so they've really now settled on that second path being where they want to go. And yeah, I think it inevitably was going to lead to a single product. To your point, you open Disney Plus today, the integration of Hulu really isn't there. It mostly shows up in the form of a tile, right? Which is like
Yeah.
it almost feels like a different interface as opposed to when you pull up Netflix, it all feels very congruent and is part of one thing. So I think it's a really good example of how they're still going through this issue today and still managing this transition. It's taking obviously a very long time even to get here. So yeah, it's been a major focus for shareholders and investors, and it's been a major challenge for the company to even get this.
Back in the day, they did a lot with branding from the movie brands, and there was Disney, and they didn't do anything really off-brand Disney. And then when Michael Eisner took over, he created Touchstone and Hollywood Pictures, and they bought Miramax, and so they were doing things under those banners, and that made sense because then they could be in the little bit more, serious drama, the risky stuff, and put that on a different brand. They did that with Nightmare Before Christmas. They thought that was going to be too risky, so they put that on Touchstone first, and now it's a Disney product. For me, it's about the visibility of the fact that when I open up this app, and again, I mean, it probably doesn't matter to most people, I would say. But again, I'm a huge Disney fan. I open this up and I go, oh, there's Bluey. There's Alien Earth. Like,
Right,
oh, okay, here's GMA. And then Ted Bundy.
right,
Chibiverse. Like, it's like
right,
Spider-Man and his awesome friends. I get that if I was a parent with a small child like you, that I could put, a child lock sort of a thing on this and set the settings so that it only showed the good stuff and not the Kardashians or the monkey or the things that it's showing to me. But I feel like that when they first launched this, I saw a value to them keeping them separate. But now that they're, coming together, I think that a lot of the stuff that Bob Iger talked about on this call was about like better things, not just coming to the ESPN interface, but coming to this interface as well. I'm all for that. There are some things that they have that other streaming services don't. Like they have the extras. You don't usually see those extras that they're putting in there. I think there should be more than there are, but they have extras. I love on Amazon Prime when they do that X-ray thing, because 90% of the time when my wife and I are watching something, we go, I know that guy from something. What's he from? And then on Amazon Prime, you pull it up and it shows X-ray. Here are the people on the screen, and then you can click and see what they did. That's the kind of interactive stuff I would love to see them add here. But like we talked about, when you go to Hulu, it's super clunky. You just click on it, and it's like you can only see the things that you can see. I'm sure that that's going to change and evolve. If this becomes one brand, do we think it's going to be called Disney Plus, Hulu, or something else? Or Disney Plus and Hulu? Like, that seems like too much.
yeah. Just taking a step back real quick. This is again like this is the strategic challenge or a good example of the strategic challenge that they face. Whereas Netflix came to this from a clean slate, and its brand means something very different than what the Disney brand means. And I think this is partly why they thought it was a good idea to have these two services in terms of having very clear branding separation between the two. Where, as you know, pulling up Disney Plus and seeing a Ted Bundy documentary is pretty jarring for a certain type of customer.
Right.
Not what they expect when they think of Disney. Um, and this even continued in my mind too. There's an interesting interview from I believe it's June of 2024. I want to say relatively shortly after Bob Iger came back as CEO, where the conversation feels really unorganized, especially for him, where he's effectively saying all options are on the table in terms of the strategy we take from here. And in my mind, it's always been pretty darn clear what those two roads are. Road number one is just be Disney, and you're running Disney Plus in the way that you kind of just described it and how it kind of originally came to market, right? It's very narrowly focused around a handful of kind of marquee IP and the amount of content on there is going to be somewhat limited, but it's going to be really high quality. It's the kind of thing that you can turn on and basically just let your kids, watch whatever they want. The alternative route, which they've now really gone down, is creating a service that is going to drive a certain amount of engagement that will support investing in content, both entertainment programming and sports rights. There's certain things that will draw an audience on their own because they're so popular, like an NFL game or a new Marvel movie. But there's other things that are not up to that same bar, and they need a consistent level of engagement and mind share to be something that people turn on with a certain level of frequency that this stuff is still getting consumed. So that's kind of the fundamental challenge that they've been trying to bridge as they pursue this strategy. And you see it in Nielsen tracks this data. The combined share for Disney Plus and Hulu is roughly 5% of US TV time. Netflix, and again, that's two services, right? It's kind of getting double counted. So Netflix on its own is at about 8% share. Now Netflix has more subscribers. They have about 90 million customers in the US and Canada compared to Disney Plus is just short of 60 million and Hulu's right around 50 million. So yeah, I think to kind of answer your question, I think it eventually will be named Disney Plus, and I think ultimately it's going to get to the point where you either can't subscribe to the individual services, or you just have to subscribe to Disney Plus. Hulu's not going to be an option anymore, or they'll just take the next step from what they've done already, which currently the Duo subscriptions $10.99. To subscribe to Disney Plus individually or Hulu individually is $9.99. So they've already obviously made the pricing very clear. You're getting yourself much more value if you do the bundle. So you might as well do that. They're just going to push that even further to ultimately just collapse that. But yeah, this is it's a strategic choice, and I think looking back, the real big issue would have been what do you then do with ESPN and sports rights? Even today, it's not totally resolved. It's still somewhat up in the air how successful this will be when it's all said and done. The ESPN D2C app a week from now being a very prominent example of what kind of the hurdles that kind of still remain ahead.
So let's move on to the next segment, which is about ESPN. And you talked about that a little bit. A lot of the packages that are Disney Plus and Hulu and ESPN Plus. And so they made some big moves and really kind of started stacking the deck by acquiring the NFL Network assets this past week, as well as the WWE edition of content, which I think kind of got swept under the rug with the NFL part. The NFL seemed to be the big ticket part of that. I find it funny whenever there's a deal like this that Disney does, and it's for ESPN, which I think most people don't associate this as being part of the Disney company. Like, I know Star Wars is part of the Disney company because we blame them for screwing up Star Wars. I blame, that we know Marvel is because they tout it so much. But I feel like a lot of people let go of the fact that ABC and ESPN are part of the Disney company. And yet, whenever a news outlet talks about it, they always use a Mickey or Minnie to make sure that we kind of like get the feeling like this Mickey Mouse operation is going to try to run the NFL, or they get all up in arms about it and upset about it. When I go to D23 in California, the Disney convention, and they run that big sizzle reel that opens everything up, they always have a ton of sports. And so it seems like they love to take ownership of that. Like, as I'm watching the scene from Star Wars and the scene from, Iron Man, they throw in a picture of like the Bengals, and it's like, wait, you own the Bengals? No, you don't own the Bengals, but you have ESPN. So I feel like that there's a disconnect a lot of times between that. But let's talk about this NFL deal. And first of all, I have an unhealthy defense mechanism for Disney. I don't know why. I do own some stock, not probably as much as most people, but I do own some stock. But I want Disney to own the world, whereas I think a lot of people don't necessarily want that. And so when they do things like the Pixar merger, I feel like Pixar wasn't a purchase, it was a merger. And they're like, here, bring that in, and we're going to give you some of the company. They did that deal here with NFL, and for some reason I feel unsettled about that. So start wherever you want to on it, but I feel like also just the fact that they gave NFL 10% equity in ESPN, I don't know how I feel about that. Tell me how I should feel about that, Alex.
Yeah, well, I think it reflects where we're at this point in time, and I think the easiest way to say this is you go back roughly 10 years ago, 100 million households had pay TV. You fast forward to today, that number is closer to 60 million households have pay TV. And ESPN, the channel, and Disney, the company, are the primary drivers of the bundle in terms of the economics. They're also, not surprisingly, given they're the driver in terms of the economics, they're also a major driver in terms of why people continue to have the bundle, right? Um, so again, as we go through this period where in the mid 2010s, Netflix is really proving out its model in terms of consumer interest at a minimum, and then over time also proving out the economic viability of that model. That starts the wave of the entertainment programming assets moving over. So you then again get to the late 2010s, and we get the launch of ESPN Plus, which is kind of funny in hindsight. Bob Iger first talked about the inevitability of ESPN moving to direct to consumer in, I believe it was August 2017. Maybe it was August 2015. It was one of those. Fast forward to now, and we're finally getting a clear, like the actual ESPN direct to consumer launch. And what they did in the interim was ESPN Plus, which in theory could have been that, but I think they were, well, one, they were very concerned about how to actually operate the platform and to have the economics not take away from what they were doing on the linear side of the house. Two, they had to figure out things like the technology behind password sharing and other things like that, which again could significantly hurt the business. So long story short, what they launched in 2018 and which now has, I think, as you said earlier, something north of 20 million subscribers, primarily through the Trio bundle, it didn't actually become the bridge to D2C that I think probably was originally envisioned, because it became this kind of supplemental secondary product. I think that reflected kind of a strategic mistake on their part in thinking about these distribution channels as separate things versus what they should have really been focused on, which is distribution and access for people who care about it. So that's where we're finally getting to now with the launch of ESPN D2C. But the economics have started to be more pressured over time as that significant loss of pay TV subscribers has weighed against their ability to take price. So, and also the increasing cost of sports rights, by the way. So yeah, the business is in a more difficult spot than it's been in for a long time. They're making a lot of decisions around rights like Major League Baseball or Formula One that they probably would have thought about differently even 5 or 10 years ago than they do today. But yeah, they're really trying to figure out what's the path forward. And the NFL deal is a really prominent example of some of the new things that they're willing to do.
Is it a conflict of interest that the NFL has 10%? I mean, obviously it's not because somebody let it happen, but that they own 10% of a streaming service?
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly is some questions about that over time, and ESPN has had a fair amount of publicity over the years about this exact issue. There's been prominent examples of them wanting to run stories that the NFL was not fond of, and them either saying, "Too bad, it's journalistic integrity," or them acquiescing, at least to some degree, in order to stay on the good side of their most important sports partner. So yeah, I would say that this only increases that concern further. Obviously, they said that it will not have an impact on anything, but those are words, and we'll see what actually happens.
I love that. Those are words, but we'll see. Yeah, they have been making a lot of moves. I personally am again of the mindset that Disney should own everything. And so the fact that they sold off the Angels and the Ducks, like I kind of wish they still owned those teams. They have enough of a relationship with them still that I feel like they still do, like, bobblehead nights with them and other stuff. So I mean, there's still a relationship, but something about it I just thought was really cool that they own these professional sports teams. Um,
I mean, real
so
quick, it just it probably helps to frame for people. We'll get into the experiences side of the business in a second, but the video side of the business, between the combination of the linear TV pressures that I was just describing and the early cost of launching direct to consumer and trying to scale that business, Disney's video businesses went from earning almost $10 billion in 2018 to at the bottom in 2023, they earned $4 billion. So it declined by 60%.
yeah,
So this is the main reason why the stock price has been pressured because they're going through these transitions and trying to figure out the path forward. Thankfully, the experiences business has been really strong, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but it's been a very taxing financial transition for the company, which partly speaks to why Netflix's advantage has proven so strong. Nobody else, once they realized they were in a bad spot, Disney has been really the only legacy media company that has since been able to deal with what does it mean to now try to recover our position. The others have effectively thrown in the towel.
no, and as a huge Parks fan, I feel like that we've seen almost transparently the drain of the parks income into filling the gaps or plugging the dike of the of ESPN, and I feel like I've heard that forever, like that ESPN, because of people cutting the cord because of this and that, is costing the company a lot of money, and to fund that, they're just dragging all that money that the parks are doing and not reinvesting it back in the parks. Obviously, in the past couple of years, Bob and Josh have made some major announcements about the amount of money that's going to funnel back into those parks for really the first time in a long time. However, I do feel like that's the thing that I've heard over and over again, that ESPN more than anything has been a drain on the company than a way in. But at the same time, like I said, they tout it. They spike the ball, so to speak, when they're when they're at the D23 conventions and show everybody this is something that we have and this is some pull that we have. And they've tried some things where they do the goofy playing basketball things that they introduced, or Toy Story and football, and I'm not sure that the sports fans are loving that. That's probably why we have that Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse thing on that Reuters story, kind of poking fun at it a little bit. One of the things
Which
as a
is real
sports
funny,
fan,
real just on that point, real quick. It's just really funny because you go back even to after the financial crisis, call it 2010 or so, the parks business made just under $2 billion. It was the parks was like this secondary piece of the business that yes, it was important in terms of the brand and it did drive some economics, but it really was secondary to the video business and theatrical linear TV, etc. Um, that's now really flipped from a combination of the video business being pressured, but also experiences going from again a $2 billion business to now more like a $10 billion business. Which how they've got there is somewhat been through volume and expansion, but it's also been through pricing and like driving yield. And you get to a really interesting point in the 2022 period where the losses in D2C are at their absolute peak. This is towards the end of Chapek's tenure. And I think in that same time period, as you're coming out of the pandemic and people are returning to the parks in big numbers again, is when you have, as I remember it at least, kind of this uproar around certain things like park photos or pricing and how some of these things are they're nickel and diming a lot more than they used to, and it just reached a breaking point where it was really upsetting people. And to your exact point, it's funny how those things probably interplayed and how the decision making from this is really challenged. We have to tap this kind of to help plug the hole. Yeah, that can lead to some decisions that in the long run are not particularly intelligent.
I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the parks and experiences. But I'm a sports fan. I love the Commanders. What team do you pull for NFL? Do you pull for anybody in particular?
I'm a Ravens fan.
Oh, I'm so sorry. But And for anybody who doesn't know, there is a rivalry because Washington didn't have a baseball team forever because the Orioles had been in Baltimore, and Baltimore didn't have a football team forever because the Redskins were in D.C. And so it was like, yeah, that was a thing. When I grew up, a Redskin fan, and so when the Ravens came to Baltimore, I think Testaverde was the quarterback, and somebody dropped a Testaverde Ravens jersey on my dad's desk at work. So I think I still have it somewhere. We didn't burn it, but we probably should have. But anyway, what I do, I do fantasy football, and I love what Bob was talking about, or at least the concept of what Bob was talking about, and it made me on this Q3 earnings call where he was talking about the features and the integration that were going to be coming to this ESPN app that would include some fantasy integration, some betting integration. And it made me think, well, okay, they've been talking about what they were doing about getting into sports betting. All right, now those things are starting to come to fruition. I had DirecTV back in the day because it was the only one that allowed for that whole NFL Sunday ticket package, because I was getting blocked out from Commanders games because of the Panthers. And so they had some features built in there, and they were kind of trash. Like, they weren't really great features the way they were in there. It's like if you hold your remote upside down and push these three buttons together, then you may see a screen that shows you your NFL fantasy, whatever. Something like that has a lot of value to me. And if they can put these pieces together in a way that someone who already goes through ESPN.com to do their fantasy league, I feel like this is a huge get, no? Like, for those features. And we don't know exactly what they are yet, though, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think the potential is there. I'm cautious about their ability to execute, particularly around some of the social features and some other things they've discussed. The ESPN bet part of it all is a really prominent example in my mind, kind of similar to ESPN Plus, where I just think they misplayed the hand in a lot of ways. And first, they were reticent to get into gambling at all, which I can appreciate, and particularly if your brand is going to be Disney, that there's a logic to that. But then they changed their mind, and from my perspective, they made a deal that was primarily led by getting the most money in the short term versus picking the right partner. And that has now led them to a place where ESPN Bet is a bit of a second ran app that doesn't have material market share and probably doesn't really have a path to getting material market share, which matters more now as you talk about something like this app refresh. So just one example, but I think they've shared a lot of ideas between social betting, a personalized sports center, fantasy. There's a lot of pieces to this that they want to jam in there. And by the way, it's also supposed to be able to run, there's going to be a lot more video running through this than there used to be in terms of how much they got to be prepared for as a result of the changes they're making. And at some point, even potentially access to games from other service providers like a Fox or somebody else, where it'd be a lot nicer if the integration was through a single interface like ESPN versus me having an ESPN app and a Fox Sports app and whatever else if I'm subscribing to a bundle. But again, these are all ideas that may have merit where they then have to go out and execute against that. And I think
Well,
the base case at this point is that it's a high hurdle to actually execute. I'm not so sure that they'll do it well, but I hope they do.
Well, we can always hope. I was going to say, you haven't really done the parks too much to really understand how much a piece of crap the My Disney Experience app has been. And so, from the company that brought you this and the horrible lottery ticket systems that they do for buying tickets to D23 or Oogie Boogie or any of those things that can seem to go down all the time, any kind of a technological thing is going to be a wait and see how it goes, and I'm sure will be a rocky start. But if they can pull it off, I'm excited to use those tools and be a little bit more of a part of it. The last part of this ESPN part, or at least that I think we should probably talk about, is the WWE part. And are you a WWE fan?
I am not. I used to be when I was younger, but I have not seen it in a while. I'll watch it when it's on ESPN. I'll watch the WrestleMania or SummerSlam, whatever it is. I'll give it a try.
So it says Disney is paying $1.6 billion for WWE rights. ESPN will stream WrestleMania and other major favorite offerings for 5 years. So different from the NFL deal, which is sort of like a partnership, a merger-ish sort of a thing, an investment. This one is sort of just like we're trying it out. We're buying in for 5 years on this one. I know a lot of people who are in our Park Adventurers Club are huge wrestling fans. I know that wrestling's a big deal. I personally am not into wrestling, but I'm not against it for any reason. I do love John Cena. I love The Rock, but that's probably pretty vanilla. That's probably like liking Mickey Mouse, which is, that's where I'm at too. But I mean, you've got that HHN Halloween Horror Nights house that is coming, that is wrestling themed, and so it's definitely a thing that resonates with the public. And so, do you like? It just seems weird that this was also kind of. It was an also thing. It was sort of swept under the rug, I feel like, and they didn't really talk about it as much. Just from a financial standpoint, any thoughts on this piece of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and this gets got back to what I was saying before in terms of mind share and wanting people to come back consistently, right? Especially that now that people can buy ESPN a la carte, or will be able to very shortly. ESPN's back half of the calendar, call it the last 5 months of the year, basically is incredibly strong given their position in basically the NFL and college football, right? Um, Now the question is the other 6, 7 months of the year, and they have a smattering of golf rights, they have soccer rights, they have NHL rights, they have NCAA basketball, they have a lot of other college rights. I think the WWE, the premium live events, the PLEs, can help fill in, kind of part of that calendar and be a high profile event for them that they could acquire at a pretty reasonable price. I mean, the 325 million a year, I believe it is, that they're paying. They just let go of the MLB package, which they were paying north of 500 million a year for. They let go of the UFC package that they were paying 500 as well for, that 550 for, that Paramount just took down for 1.1 billion a year. And they also let go of Formula One, where they were paying just short of 100 million a year. So yeah, in terms of their kind of net spending, obviously there's other assets to consider, particularly the price increase for NBA rights. But across those assets, they've kind of come out ahead, at least in the short term. So it gives them a little bit more money to work with. But yeah, I think again, the strength of their programming is really strong. It's kind of just the calendar dynamics to figure out, right? Which is where I think something like TGL, the golf league, that kind of helps them. And this will probably work for that as well. I'm sure they've had conversations with WWE about, hey, how can we work the calendar to even more perfectly fit kind of our needs.
That seemed to be a major part of this earnings call, because of the announcement coming at the same time about the NFL, because of them leaning into ESPN a lot and talking about spinning it off, and it being its own thing. All the features they talked about. It was a 41-minute call, I believe. A lot of it, man. You must listen to these all the time. The beginning of it is so freaking dry. I just can't even. Like, I'm listening to it. Like, I mean, again, I'm used to walking into D23 and them running these huge sizzle reels and like wowing me, and I was just like, I don't know. I don't know how you do it. And again, this is something I'm interested in. I can imagine that you have to hear a bunch of them, and you're like, oh, this is a thing.
Here's the secret. After you do it long enough, you develop a system. Mine is I only listen to replays, and I only do it with the transcript in front of me, so I can listen to it on 1.5 or so, and I can slow down and stop as I need to, or when questions come up that have nothing to do with what I'm focused on, I can skip those. So it makes the process a bit more efficient. But yes, there are some parts of the earnings calls that are quite dry.
Well, Hugh Johnson, the CFO, it was interesting the way he fielded some of the questions, almost like he was trying to protect Iger from some of them. Like, Bob, I'll take this one. Like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
either he was either trying to protect Bob, or he was trying to make sure Bob didn't say the wrong thing.
He's a professional and experienced CFO, and it's a funny part of this kind of whole. At the end of the day, owning stock in a company, you're basically just betting on the long-term success of the company and tell its decisions, et cetera. In the
Yeah.
short term, there's this other stuff around messaging and clarity of what they're trying to do. And And let's just say Hugh Johnston is experienced at that part of the game and kind of knowing what Wall Street analysts and some other investors what they kind of want in the short term. So he plays that game well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things he kept harping on. Well, first of all, when they opened it up, they said only one question, which almost no one asked just one question. They were. It
Of
was
course.
almost like they tried to make it sound like it was one. They would say, first, I want to ask about the cruise ships and what you're doing there, and then also about ESPN. Like they weren't even related. And sometimes they would acknowledge just one question and move on, and sometimes they would like tag team the answers. But I thought that was funny. And then the other part of it is that he continually said, I cannot speak to 2026. I will not speak to 2026. And they kept going, in regards to 2026. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, all right. So we're dealing with children here. That's perfect. That's great.
When you've
Good.
listened to these long enough, I can't remember exactly what it was that he says, but they say one thing that opens up a tiny window for interpretation of whether or not it was reaffirming some prior guidance or related to some prior comment, and then the analysts are like flies to food or something. Like they all come after that one thing, which is
Yeah.
hilarious to see because a lot of times it's about something that's really not that important at the end of the day, but it's just part of the game, I guess.
Well, I think there was a previous call where Bob, and it may have been an interview and not one of the earnings calls, where Bob Iger said something in regards to the new Pandora land coming to California Adventure, and I think he referred to it as a land, and then everybody's like, wait, you said it was an experience before. Wait, it's a land? And, and they just kind of really like leaned into that part of it. So I get what you're saying. It's like they get that part with like a dog with a bone and go, oh, wow, we're going to really narrow in and like peel the banana back now and figure out what's going on.
Right.
So let's move on to this part, the studio and the box office, which is, the company was founded as a studio first and foremost before they owned television, before they owned parks and experiences. And so, I think this is part of the company that it historically hasn't made a ton of money until all of these mergers and acquisitions happened of Marvel and Star Wars. Because if you looked at the box office numbers, those movies that were, that we think of as huge, like Lion King and whatever else, those were kids movies. So there were a lot of matinees, which meant there was cheaper prices. And then there was also they were never in the top 10 really until, they bought up Marvel and Star Wars and started doing these bigger things like Avatar, and now Buena Vista Distribution or Disney is in the top 20. They're like most of the top 20 when it comes to the money. So obviously still a big deal for them. Obviously it was there was a setback with 2020 and COVID, as we talked about before, with the movie industry and people not wanting to go to the theaters, then getting used to streaming and then going, let's just stay home. I still love that movie theater experience. So they talked a little bit about specifically Lilo and Stitch remake / live action version. And then the Fantastic Four that just launched, which we don't have real big numbers yet for Fantastic Four because it's only been out for 2 weeks or whatever, but there's enough to know that it's doing fairly well for a recent Marvel movie. Now, to compare it to Endgame doesn't work, but it's doing okay. But the question came up about there being a lot of remakes and them kind of staying away or moving away from new ideas. And I know that Pixar got pounded about that because they kind of clapped back at their audience about, everybody was like, Elio, I hate Elio. That's a dumb idea. And then Pixar was like, well, you said you wanted original content and here it is. There's a value to these brands. There's a value to Marvel. And I loved Bob's twist where he said, in a lot of ways, Marvel Fantastic Four really is a new property because even though it's Marvel and even though it's been done before, this is the first time we're doing it. And I thought to myself, that's a reach, Bob. That's something.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
How did you feel in general about this part of the call?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I wrote an article a couple of years ago, actually around the time the release of Black Widow, where I looked at some of the historic data, and it was exactly what you said. I looked at since the turn of the century of the top 20 movies at that point in time. This is in kind of mid 21. Disney accounted for 70% of the list and all of the top five, and it's the names you suspect, right? Marvel, Star Wars, Lucasfilm, Disney Animation, Pixar. And Avatar. So that's the good thing. The flip side of that is I think part of this is, kind of the Netflix effect and the D2C effect. The options available for in-home entertainment programming in terms of easy use, in terms of, access, I think are much better than they were 25 years ago or something. There's a lot of competition for the theater. And, even you look last year after we've had some recovery in the years since the pandemic, the US box office has recovered a lot, but attendance is down 40% from where it was, I believe, a decade ago, or maybe even 15 years ago. So yeah, I think even, Disney is they're in the right genre of content in terms of Avatar and Marvel and even some of these kids movies, right? That they can still work at the box office. Um, but even for those type of movies, there is the question of like what are the legs going to be, and how are they going to hold up in week 2, 3, 4, 5, especially as the window before they show up on a streaming service that a lot of 50 million, 60 million households pay for, and they'll get for free, quote unquote for free when it's on there. You've seen Fantastic Four. I think they said had the largest drop in week two of basically any kind of like modern Marvel, and I think that's just reflective of that idea, right? You're going to get a certain audience that may or may not be the size of what it used to be, and it may not have the duration of what it used to have. But also, again, this kind of speaks to the question of how do we as a company think about where value is derived from our product, and then how do we price around that? You know what I mean? Like, so they can adjust for that, and these things can monetize in a second window on Disney Plus maybe more effectively than they could at one point in time, and they can sell it globally. And the pricing of the product, Disney Plus can't be, it's currently generating roughly a $7 ARPU, average revenue per user, in the United States. Over time, that number can't be $7. It needs to be 10, 15, $20. And again, it's the comparable idea here being, on the one movie a month, it's the price of going out and buying that DVD 15 years ago, right? So this is where they need to get to. And I think again, it's really instructive to look at the Netflix journey. Has been, yes, there was a phase where they were building mind share and getting subscribers, and the product was quote unquote cheap. But they've been really demanding in terms of asking for price increases and demonstrating the value to customers, and then earning those price increases, right? And they don't do any of the, famously Black Friday around Thanksgiving, where here comes Hulu with a $1.99 offering for the next 6 months or whatever. Here's Peacock with a $1.99 offering. They don't do any of that. And these other guys, particularly Disney, in my mind, I'm less concerned about the others. They need to recognize the value that they're offering to people, and then they have to price it accordingly. So, there was a build-up period here after the launch in 2019, and it's only been 5, 6 years. But yeah, they're nearing the point where they need to command the value that they provide, and getting a movie that is released in theaters in your house for free as part of your subscription 45 days after it comes out, that is a very valuable thing. And if people want to watch it at home versus in the theaters, that's perfectly fine. But Disney needs to adjust their monetization account, right? So I think we'll get there over time, and the box office will still be useful for a certain type of occasion. These big movies and the weekend they come out, or the first couple weeks they come out. But then that tail, in my mind, has probably permanently changed in terms of what it looks like.
Yeah, you make a great point about that, because I think that the minute something drops in the theaters, people are going, well, when's it going to be on digital, and then when's it going to be on free streaming? Where can I stream it for free? For free, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
I saw this TikTok video the other day where it was a guy sitting at his desk, and his girlfriend walks in and says, "Hi, I'm Hulu. We're gonna have to raise the price." And he's like, "Okay." And then Netflix comes in. He goes, "We're gonna double your price." And he's like, "No." And they're like, "You're not gonna get Stranger Things. Okay, you can do it." And then Paramount Plus walks in. He goes, "No, no, I'm drawing the line at you. You're done." Um, Because it almost feels like, to have these conversations, these water cooler conversations about, talking about The Mandalorian. Well, I mean, people aren't doing that as much anymore. But, to talk about Wednesday, you've got to have that streaming service. And if you don't have that streaming service, then, well, what are you doing with your life, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I definitely think that there was a time where Disney wanted to be that value proposition to get people in the door, to try the product, to secure those subscribers, and then start to slowly raise the price. Because certainly Netflix didn't start out at $19.99 a month. They started out as a mailing a mailing your disc to you kind of a place, and then moved up through the ranks. But it'll be interesting to see how much they feel like they can do and how hard they can push to raise the price.
That's a really, really important point that ties into what I was saying earlier. Remember, I was talking about this strategic choice that they had at one point in time. Are we going pure Disney Plus, narrow RIP, very, very much tied into parks and the properties that people know, or are we something broader? Well, they've gone the broader route, but now you see what that means in terms of pricing, particularly on the sports content. They have to cover the cost of all that they're carrying, and that's why you now get this trio bundle with ESPN D2C. The promotional price out of the gates $29.99. It's not going to be $29.99 in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So again, you made kind of a trade-off here in terms of, we could have been something that, if it was just kind of that narrow Disney Plus thing, it could have been $9.99 or $12.99 for a very long time and still been a good business, and maybe had pretty significant adoption in the US and globally. I mean, there'd be some adjustments to price, but it would serve the purpose of, these are our brands, we want to get them in front of people. We do have a decent business here, and then we monetize through parks experiences really effectively. Well, now you're playing a game that's a little bit more difficult, because you got to convince people to spend quite a bit more money to have access. So yeah, there's a lot of trade-offs in terms of kind of the strategy they've taken it, and how it kind of diverges from what I view as kind of like the core Disney flywheel versus the ESPN and pay TV.
Well, and this section of it was about content, right? And that's kind of like where Disney shines with synergy, is that we bring Lilo and Stitch back and we put it in the theater and you love it, and so then you want to go back to Disney Plus and rewatch the original and the spin-offs, and then you want to go to the parks and you want to meet Stitch, and then you want to go to the Disney store or to Target and buy the merchandise. Like that, the content is the core of that synergy, and if you don't have that new, like that content, or that ever growing interest in that content, that's a big deal. One of the last things though that he talked about on this, which it almost slipped by me when Bob dropped this, but he almost basically, and I think it was Bob that did this and not Hugh, but he basically said, we're going to come up against a comp of Inside Out 2 from last year. You heard that, right? And it almost expect a speed bump here, because that was such a big movie for us that it made 1.7 billion dollars in 2024, and we're going to have that comp in 2025, and we're going to be coming off of that. And to that I say, you just got done telling us how great Lilo and Stitch did this year. Like, you just told us about that and how great that was. So you were high-fiving everybody about how great that was. And you're like, but Inside Out 2 probably made more. Now, we do have Avatar, Fire and Ash, and we do have Zootopia coming up in the pipeline. But he just seemed like he was like trying to prepare everybody for disappointment. Am I wrong?
No, again, it's just like, it's just massaging this expectations management kind of thing. And at all points in time, the worst things company ever say is like, hey, this is a good quarter. It wasn't our best quarter. We had challenges that weren't our own fault. Like, that's when things are going really poorly. So everything is always just framed in terms of how's the best way to say this today. And yeah, again, like a lot of it's just, you listen to it, kind of roll your eyes.
Well, I was going to say, and you know this better than I do, is that numbers can be manipulated in such a way, like the numbers are the numbers, but the perception of the numbers can be manipulated and say, we did really, really well this year. We did better last year, so it doesn't look like we did really, really well this year, but we did better last year. But we're still doing good. Like it just that's what it sort of felt like on that one. And again,
Well, that's the funny part too, and it's kind of that arbitrary line of did we grow or did we not grow? Even if it's we grew 0.1% versus declined 0.1%, it's perceived very, very differently, even though it's, in numbers, it's really not the material, but it's part of the narrative around a company story. It's just kind of funny how that works.
Yep. All right, let's move on to the last part of it, which is saving the best for last. This is Disney Parks and Experiences. And, they just announced at D23, Destination D23, there's a difference between the two, that they're not going to do a parks panel at Destination D23. They didn't announce it. They just released, here's what's coming up. And everybody was like, oh, there's not going to be a parks panel. There's no reason to go. I have a ticket to that. I disagree. I think it's still a great event. But I was surprised when they announced they made the announcement a couple weeks ago about the changes that were coming to the animation courtyard at Hollywood Studios, and I thought that's something you should have saved for Destination D23, and you didn't. So I should have known something was up then. And they didn't really talk a ton about theme parks and experiences on this one, and I think this is another one where Hugh was like, that's kind of 2026, and we're not really going to talk about that. When it comes to theme parks, though, the big thing that everybody was expecting was down the street from you, there's a new park, and it's called Epic Universe, and everybody was like, Disney, what are you going to do to match this? And I remember an earlier call where Bob Iger was like, we're not really going to do something to match it because we've been doing stuff. We've been getting ready by opening this attraction and that attraction. So we've been doing things all along that would lead up to this, which I thought was BS, but it is a thing. And so then they make the announcements about all the money that they're spending. And so I think there's two pieces to this one. One is the theme parks, and the other one is when you say experiences. In this particular case, we're not talking about consumer products, we're talking about the cruise lines, which I'm just going to throw all this out there and then you pick up whatever you want, is that 13 ships are in the future of this company. That seems like a lot of ships. And someone on the call actually mentioned, will there be fatigue on this? Or will we see, will you get to a point of diminishing returns on adding all of these vessels? Because he was touting how the Disney Adventure, the 8th ship, is almost double the capacity of of the other ships that are out there. And so they're launching 2 new ships this year, which will take them up to 8. I never thought I'd see the day where they'd own more than 2. And so obviously they see some huge potential in this, if not only they have 8 now, but then plan on there being 5 more down the road. Start wherever you want to on that one, wherever you think.
Yeah, I think it's a good encapsulation of how things have changed and where they feel confident investing money. I mean, as I said before, the experiences business basically went from 2 billion of earnings, in 2010 or so, to it's going to earn roughly 10 billion this year. Primarily driven by the parks business, with a lot of help from kind of per cap spending, whether it's ticket prices, people buying, more food products, whatever it may be, hotel spending, et cetera. So they've got a lot of confidence to invest here, and the cruise line is a very prominent example of how they're doing that. To your point, I think they have to be thoughtful about how much capacity they throw into the system, but I suspect that this will work pretty well over time. And I think it speaks to broader changes in kind of the economy, right, in terms of where people are spending time and money and how they think about experiences and kind of premium experiences at that. So I feel really, really good about experiences.
Cruise lines, I feel like they have a reputation of being more expensive, but I also think that people, always have a good experience when they do a Disney cruise. I know I have enjoyed the Disney cruises that I've done, but it does surprise me that they would do this many more ships and build them up. But something you were talking about earlier when you were talking about sports betting and that not being very Disney, they don't do gambling on their ships. So, that's one of those things where I feel like I'm surprised they haven't decided to change that thought process, because they changed their thought process of the Magic Kingdom and Disneyland Park being dry parks. Like as the consumer desires and needs change, I'm sure they say that they kind of take these things that were always part of the purity of Disney, and they just kind of go, well, it's what people want, so let's go ahead and do this. I get that there are changes in the models and things like that, but I'm wondering if that ever affects people's choice in a cruise, that they can't gamble. I don't know, but still, you've got 5 more ships coming That's a gamble to me. I don't know. I always believe Disney knows what they're doing. I always do, which is probably a mistake. But I always like believe that Disney knows what they're doing and would have done the market research before you build something as big as a ship.
Yeah, I mean, I think also this kind of speaks to the decision on Abu Dhabi, right? Like, I think the world has also continued to evolve over time, and there's probably capacity or an economic model for ships and docked out of places that maybe didn't work at one point in time previously. And again, I think they have to strike this balance to your point, and it goes back to kind of the Chapek era and even some of the messaging around certain things where it's kind of funny. It's Iger returns and it's hey, we're going to fix all these things at parks that people didn't like, the nickel and diming stuff, and then you get a year or two down the road, it's like, oh, by the way, the per cap spending continues to increase. So there's like different ways it shows up, but it's really important to, in my mind, it speaks to a very real part of what they need to do, which is avoid the things that feel like you're getting nickel and dimed, but you can still lean into things that are a premium experience, right? It's kind of justifying that premium experience, which for a lot of families will be something that they do with their children once, twice, three times before they're 18 or something. So you can get away with an experience that may be 20%, 30%, 40% more expensive per person than what the guy down the street's charging. It just has to be an experience that justifies that spend, right? I think that's where they really shine. And obviously, there's the input of the content engine, as we were kind of talking about before, having this combination of Lilo and Stitch type things that are renewing the vigor around certain franchises, and then obviously, adding a couple new things periodically that also kind of add fuel to the fire. But you look at the international park results; they're in a lot better place than where they were previously, and part of that, from what I understand, has been attributable to things like at the park in Paris, kind of really leaning on Marvel and Avengers, right? Like leaning on the IP strategy in a way that, for someone who grew up in Florida and has been going to the parks for a long time, has gone less frequently as of late. But when I was a kid, I went a lot. It seemed a lot more like the Splash Mountain, Thunder Mountain, like that type of thing. Versus now, a lot of that stuff over time has been really clearly moved to be. I know there was branding behind those things as well, but now it's really the mainstream stuff kind of driving the parks, right? I think that makes a ton of sense. It's obviously working in terms of uh, consumer interest and financial results. So yeah, it's a really really strong point for the company that, again, I think, had it not been there and had it not been developed like it has been over the past, call it, 25 years, um, this period that they just went through on the transition in the video business, the stock has not done great, but it would have done much, much, much worse if they had not had the experience business as part of this enterprise. It would have been a lot scarier in terms of the kind of the financial developments.
Yeah, and that's kind of the plus of having this many different divisions is if one of them's doing poorly, you can tout the other one. It's like I'm sure there are some announcements that they wait until something bad was reported for ESPN for them to turn around and tell you about this new opening attraction. I'm sure they keep some in their pocket to be able to say, "Hey, let's divert your attention over here so that you still see that new shiny thing that we're working on and still have some consumer or investor confidence." In our brand, and they're magicians at it. Honestly, they really are. One thing I want to ask you about the Epic thing is, like, I've been to Epic, I love Epic, I think it's great. I will probably be one of those people that just adds Epic to my list and not, I mean, to my trip and not, either or. And I feel like that's what they're saying is that they've seen like a zero net on this one. Like they haven't lost anything, they haven't gained anything from Epic being there. But yet the offers that they seem to be running seem to say to the contrary, because there's like get $100 gift certificate if you buy an annual pass, or these deep discounts on the hotel rooms. It feels like that were in a little bit of a panic mode maybe still, but I don't know if you've seen that or not as far as trying to keep the people coming and the eye on the ball for Disney.
I mean, it surely hasn't shown up in a significant way in the financials yet, at least from what they've reported. I'm sure there's some share shift as new feature or new experiences are added to certain parks or new parks are open, but I think overall it's kind of a rising tide that then kind of gets shuffled between primarily the two of them as time goes on. So I'm of the perspective that that park opening is probably a decent thing for Disney at the end of the day in terms of what it does for visitation and demand.
I've heard people say that they basically built it with the money that Disney gave them from Hulu.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The Hulu thing was a fascinating experience that took far too long to get resolved, and that was a yeah, it was a really messy piece of the Fox deal that the future would have if they had only owned a third of it as opposed to picking up that second third from the Fox deal and then as a result becoming the majority owner. It's really interesting to think how things might have played out had that not taken place. I mean, it was a material part of that deal, but again, I think there was a point in time where the future of what Disney is today would look quite a bit different than what it actually is now, particularly as it relates to like a Hulu and an ESPN. I think they could have gone a very different direction. But we're kind of past a turning point now, so it's now it's full steam ahead with this strategy. And yeah, I've been following the story for I own Fox actually, which is how I ended up owning Disney. I took shares in the deal. Um, Disney has not been a particularly good investment because the stock has been pretty choppy for the last decade or so. Thankfully, owning Disney gave me an appreciation for what Netflix was doing. And when Netflix went through their issues in early 2022 and people saw it as, hey, the rest of the guys are now going to compete, my my conclusion as I looked at it was, oh, this similar point in time is coming for these other companies, and the difference is they are not prepared financially to weather that storm. Kind of what I was describing earlier. So, long story short, I used it as an opportunity to buy Netflix, which has worked out much better. But it's been a fascinating learning experience with Disney. I think a trap that people fall into sometimes, like, oh, now is when things are really about to change, and there's been some version of that being said on Disney for the past 5 years. But I really do think that the launch of ESPN D2C is a seminal moment for the company in terms of truly appreciating that the channel that people want to consume content is in isn't really the main concern. It's being where consumers want you to be, and then finding ways to monetize. So I think the next 5 years will be quite interesting. Potentially, potentially that video business profitability will start moving higher again, and then they can fulfill your vision of world domination if they start making more money. So that'll be good.
Excellent. Excellent. You know what? There was a Disney stockholder meeting that was held in Raleigh, and I went because I live in Raleigh, and so I was like, "Oh, when is this ever going to happen for me again?" And it was the last Bob Chapek, Bob Iger meeting together. It was almost like he was handing it off the company at that time to Chapek, and watching the two of them on stage, it felt like a master speaker and a kid trying to deliver a book report standing next to each other. Like, it was not, I mean, it was not night and day between the two of them. So when they handed that off, though, there was a lot of this, conversation about, the company and the value and the direction they were going in, which was like 10 days before the world shut down for COVID. I mean, it was bad timing for sure. All right, so
It's funny you say that. Real quick, it's funny. It's funny you say that. Subsequently, after Iger's return, or shortly before his return, there was some reporting, I believe, from Bloomberg, and it discussed Iger and Chapek being on a plane together, going to a shareholder meeting, and preparing for the questions that are likely to get asked. It's probably the shareholder meeting you're referencing, and part of the commentary in there, as I remember it, is Iger kind of saying, "This guy, he's not prepared for this," basically. Yeah, what happened subsequently, there's definitely fingers that can be pointed back at Iger in some pretty serious ways. But yeah, that was probably an ominous sign for what was to come.
Well, all right. So as we wrap this up, one of the questions I have dovetailing off of that, and I don't know if you have a stance on this or not, is that I grew up in the era of Eisner. And then, that was like, it felt like sort of the Camelot to me of that era, because you had Frank Wells, you had Michael Eisner. They were sort of the Walton Roy reincarnate of how they ran that business. We had the Disney decade in the 90s where, Eisner built up the hotel business and, the parks and all these other things and bought these companies and made these mergers and all of this shucking and jiving that he was doing. And then, Bob Iger comes in at a time where they like his Eisner's like star was on the decline, because it was like, well, you screwed this up with Pixar and you did this and you did that, and Iger comes in and seems like the savior. Whereas again, I was uncomfortable with the Pixar deal as a Disney fan because of how much they were giving away to get that property, but I get it, and now it's shown pretty strongly. So I guess my question, and then of course the Chapek thing, no one seemed to like Chapek and blame him for everything, whether that was like some evil design of Iger's to hand the reins off at the time when the company was clearly about to be a struggle. I don't know that he could have foreseen COVID. But then he came back and everybody was like really excited about it. And now, a year from now, he's going to retire. I guess what I want to ask you is, has Iger's second run been successful in your opinion? And then the next thing is, who do you think should be the next CEO? Is it Josh D'Amaro or is it someone else?
Has it been a successful run? I mean, I think I referenced that interview earlier, the CNBC interview with David Faber, which was a couple months after his return. And again, like the messaging and the strategic vision was very much up in the air and kind of uncharacteristically um, unclear from the way that Bob Iger has historically communicated. And that is, to me, it's kind of revealing because again, like a lot of things I talked about, I think they faced a very difficult hand, and in a lot of ways, you can only attribute so much blame to someone. I think for that, but I think they've also made a number of very significant strategic mistakes along the way, and the overhang of dealing with succession has certainly been a part of that, and they've lost some notable executives along the way as a result of not being able to kind of fix that the way, or to deal with that the way that they should have. So as he comes back now and judging his second tenure, I mean, I think we're still dealing with the version of that succession issue that should have been dealt with properly the first time around. It feels to me like the approach is not too dissimilar from what we just went through, and which did not work out well. Um, so hopefully it's going to be dealt with differently at some point in time, and yeah, at some point he actually is going to retire for good, and the company needs to move forward without him. And it's kind of, disheartening a bit to me because I looked at his tenure very favorably, and I think the Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm deals were incredibly important to where the company needed to go over time. Um, but also when you read his book and you hear what he was telling the board in 2005 or late 2004 before he became CEO, and you compare that with subsequent decision making, and particularly as it relates to licensing a lot of their best content to Netflix and not even getting into D2C until late 2019, it's a lot of it is just the two ideas don't mesh perfectly. And again, company executives get caught in this game of financial implications of certain decisions, and how long we get to lose money for, and how long we have to invest for in order to stand this thing up. And my guess would be that those type of considerations kind of hindered the strategy and led them being, you know, at least 5 years too late to the party and making kind of the wrong strategic decision on the sports side of the business. As they look forward, I don't think Josh will be the pick personally. Um, I also don't know if Jimmy from ESPN will be the pick. I think really the main thing is to get someone picked sooner rather than later to give them the proper, training, for lack of a better term, and then for Iger to get out of the way. Because my sense is he meddled behind the scenes a ton throughout Chapek's run. And I'm not saying everything Chapek did was perfect. He certainly misplayed at a minimum the communication on kind of the Scarlett Johansson stuff and then some of the political stuff they dealt with. But the rising D2C losses that definitely contributed to him getting the boot was part of what the company was going to have to do anyways. And part of that speaks to prior decision making under Iger's leadership. So it's kind of a messy question, and one where my views on the issue have become more nuanced and a little bit more negative than they probably were, call it 5 years ago.
Thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate you guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Park Adventurers Club, and don't forget to join us on Sunday nights at 8:30 when we talk just about the parks. But Alex, we really appreciate you giving this financial perspective. But I have one last question for you. If you could rate this call, and I know we talked a lot about there being a lot of spin on this one, but if you could give this a letter grade, either like basically the Q3 earnings for Disney, and I'm not asking you to give it a value, but just a letter grade, what would you give it, A through F?
Yeah, I think I'd probably give it a B plus. I think people were concerned that potentially Experiences business was going to come in a bit weaker for some of the reasons we discussed, and it kind of plowed ahead and is going to end the year again in a pretty good place. We're getting prepared for this big ESPN launch, and then as we get to next quarter, we'll then have kind of guidance and expectations for the year ahead. So this was a fairly straightforward call in terms of what they needed to discuss. Next quarter is going to be a very significant one in terms of kind of the early results out of ESPN D2C and the path forward on some of these key decisions and the financial kind of expectations around all that. So, big stuff ahead for Disney.
Awesome. Well, I hope we can circle around with you again and rate or comment or berate Q4, depending on what we need to do when it comes through, either throw a party or a pity party, either one. If people wanted to find you, anywhere in particular that you would direct them?
Yeah, the name of my service is TSOH Investment Research. So you can just need to Google search or whatever, you can find that. And then you can find me on Twitter at TSOH_investing. LinkedIn, anywhere else you want to reach out to me, have any questions. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. I enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time. I appreciate everything that you've said and shared with us. Hopefully we can get more information from you in the future. Make sure to leave your comments below for Alex if you have specific questions about what we talked about tonight. But again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. We'll see you next time.